The night is as thick as ink, and the neon lights of coastal cities are flashing in the cold air, reflecting the streets and alleys with a scent of unreality. Lin Zeyan leaned under a dim road light on the road, with an unlit smoke in his hand, and his eyes coldly swept over the 24-hour convenience store opposite the street. The lights in the store were dazzlingly lit, and the silver clerk was brushing his phone with his head low, not paying attention to the static outside at all. He glanced at the old watch on his wrist and it was almost time. There is no shortage of stories in this city, especially those who are hidden in the dark and don't want to touch the police. Lin Zeyan was once the top student in the police force, and the case-solving rate was so high that it made people's eyes look at it. Unfortunately, the case finally ruined his career. After that, he left the police station and became an insignificant private detective, specializing in cases that others dare not touch. He is not for money or name, he just wants to prove what he is, maybe for himself, or for those who are still waiting for the truth. The phone in his pocket shook, and he took it out with a low head. There was a new piece of news on the screen, from Yi Xiaoqing. That girl is an independent journalist who specializes in digging out the dark inside story of the society. She is so big that she often makes herself into trouble. The news is simple: I've got it, come quickly. There is a positioning attached to the back, which is not far from his current location, just a broken alley on the edge of the old city. Lin Zeyan had a brow and didn't reply to the news. He stuffed his phone back into his pocket and walked in that direction. Although Yi Xiaoqing sometimes doesn't rely on others, he is just awesome. She said that she had obtained it, and probably got some key cable. His pace was neither fast nor slow, and he passed by several drunks and people running at night, and his brain was flying at a speed. These days they have been chasing the missing case 10 years ago. The 7 young girls, like evaporated from humans, had no traces. The police finally left the case in vaping and threw it into the file room to eat ashes. But just 3 days ago, he received an anonymous letter with only a blurry black and white photo in the envelope. The photo shows a woman's shadow, with the background like a certain abandoned factory. He realized at a glance that it was the place where the last trace of the missed case 10 years ago was broken, the old industrial area around the city. He told Yi Xiaoqing about this incident, and the two hit it off and decided to dig up the old case of Chen Yan. After all, this kind of thing was not a simple job, but a certain thought. A musty smell came to the entrance of the alley, and the ground was filled with water and garbage. The lights of several birds of road were damaged by most of them. The light that was barely illuminated only the road under the clear feet. Lin Zeyan walked in with a positioning and saw Yi Xiaoqing squatting next to a raw trash can, holding a piece of paper in his hand and a smug smile on his face. She was wearing a black sling and her hair was tied into a horse's tail. When she saw him coming, Lima stood up and shook the things in her hand. "Hey, guess what I got?" Her voice was very low, but the excitement could not be hidden. Lin Zeyan glanced at her without any worries. "Don't sell Guanzi, tell me the truth." Yi Xiaoqing curled her lips and sent the document to him. This was made from an old man, a copy of the original file of the missed case 10 years ago. When the police sealed the file, an insider secretly kept a copy and sold it to the underground market. "I spent a lot of money to get it." Lin Zeyan took the document and flipped through several pages with a faint light, his eyebrows getting tighter and tighter. The content in the file is more detailed than he thought, including the background, missing location, and even a few photos of the scene. But what made his heart sink the most was the name mentioned on the last page of the file, Chen Weiyan. This name is no stranger to this city. Chen Weiyan, a real estate tycoon, is an ostensibly philanthropist. He donates to schools and builds hospitals, and the media is full of his positive image. But Lin Zeyan knew that this guy was not clean behind him. He had investigated several small cases and the searches eventually pointed to Chen Weiyan's company, but every time he was suppressed due to insufficient evidence. The file mentioned that a company under Chen Weiyan's name happened to have a block in the industrial area where the missing case was launched. It was still developing at that time, but later it suddenly stopped work for some reason and turned into a ruin. "Isn't this a coincidence?" Yi Xiaoqing came over and said in a low voice, "I checked that Chen Viana often appeared near the industrial area, saying it was an inspection project, but who knows what he was fucking. Lin Zeyan said nothing, his fingers knocked on the edge of the document, and the connection line had begun in his brain. Chenwayan, industrial zone, and missing cases, the connection between these three is too obvious, but it makes people unable to grasp the truth. He knew that once Yi Xiaoqing's curiosity was ignited, it would be like the wild horse that was stolen and could not be suppressed at all. But this time, he had a bad feeling that things were far more complicated than they thought. Don't rush to discuss it first, he finally opened his mouth, his voice low. Chenwayan is not an ordinary person, he must be very sure of moving him, otherwise we won't know how we die. Yi Xiaoqing rolled her eyes, you are so excited every time. I know the measure, but this case has been delayed for 10 years, so someone will give the girls an explanation, right? Lin Zeyan did not answer the conversation, but folded the documents and stuffed them into his inner pocket, raised his head and looked deep in the alley. There are a few barking sounds of dogs in the darkness, and the sound of wind blowing through the broken window. This place gives people a sense of pressure that cannot be described, as if something is hidden in something uncensored. He patted Yi Xiaoqing on the shoulder and said, let's go, it's not safe here, go back and sort out the cables first. The two of them turned around and suddenly there was a rapid sound of footsteps at the entrance of the alley. Lin Zeyan reacted very quickly, and grabbed Yi Xiaoqing and retreated to the shadow beside him, staring at the direction where the sound came. The sound of the footsteps is getting closer and closer, and with the low-sounding spell, it sounds like you are looking for something. With the glimmer of light, he saw the face clearly, a middle-aged man as thin as a bamboo pole, wearing a torn coat, with panic in his eyes, and muttering in his mouth, I don't see it anymore, why don't you see it anymore? Yi Xiaoqing fell to Lin Zeyan's ears and said in a short voice, I know this person. He is one of my people. He is called Rat. He is specializing in the underground market. He is still fine just now, why did he suddenly do this? Lin Zeyan didn't reply and signaled her not to speak. He thought this was not right, the mouse was too abnormal, as if it had been ruined. He waited for his feet to sound a little longer before he said in a low voice, follow up and take a look. The two followed quietly without any noise. The mouse stumbled all the way, almost fell down a few times, and finally stopped in front of an old warehouse just in the alley. He looked around and confirmed that no one followed him, so he pushed a raw iron door and diamonded in. Lin Zeyan and Yi Xiaoqing looked at each other, stopped tacitly, and hid behind a pile of abandoned wooden boxes that were nowhere to go. This place. Yi Xiaoqing's low voice sounded, and her face was a little difficult to see. I remember the file mentioned that this warehouse was one of the doubts about the missed case. At that time, someone reported the woman's scream, but the police searched and found nothing. Lin Zeyan said a little, staring at the direction of the warehouse. The iron door was half closed, and it was pitch black. Occasionally, there were a few strange noises of response, like metal collisions, or something dragging. He felt a tight heart, and the photo from the anonymous letter flashed in his brain, the shadow of that woman, and the background was this broken industrial building. Do you want to go in and have a look? Yi Xiaoqing asked in a small voice, with a little expectation in her eyes. Lin Zeyan hesitated for a moment, and finally got angry, no, it's too risky to go in now. We don't know what the situation is inside, nor what the mouse is doing. Go back first, learn the file thoroughly, and then decide on the next step. Although Yi Xiaoqing was unwilling to give up, she did not respond. She knew that although Lin Zeyan looked cold, she never did anything she was unsure of. The two slowly retreated, avoiding the warehouse's visual range, and leaving the way forward. But just as they were about to reach the entrance of the alley, Lin Zeyan suddenly stopped and his eyes fell on a broken billboard on the road. The billboard has faded a long time ago, and several words can be seen on it, which are the promotional words of a real estate company. He narrowed his eyes and realized that it was Chenwayan's early magazine. This alley, this warehouse, and even this entire broken area seemed to be unable to get along with Chenwayan. His heart sank, and he thought that the water behind this case was far deeper than he thought. It was already 3 o'clock in the morning when I returned to Lin Zeyan's old rented office. The office is not big, full of files and photos, and there is also a city map on the wall, which marks several missing locations with red pendants. As soon as Yi Shaoqing entered the door, she threw herself into the sand and stretched out her waist. It was so exciting tonight, I almost thought I was going to face the mouse. Lin Zeyan ignored her comments and walked straight to the table, opened the file he had just obtained, and started to read the page in detail. Every detail in the file was passed in his brain: the common point, timeline, target certificate, and the name that appeared repeatedly, Chen Weiyan. The more he looked, the more he felt unfavorable. These missed cases did not look like a single siege or murder, and there seemed to be a larger picture behind them. Yi Shaoqing came over and held a can of color in his hand that just came out of the refrigerator. "What did you find? It's so hard to see on your face." Lin Zeyan pointed to a record in the index file. It is mentioned here that the last location where the missing person appeared was almost near the grounds under Chen Weiyan Company. Moreover, after each missing person, there will always be various accidental interference during the police search, such as sudden loss of the evidence, or the target person's words changed. "It's not someone, it's power." Lin Zeyan sneered. "Chen Weiyan has money and authority. It's not a problem to buy a few people. But the question is, why did he have to make such a thing? What good will the misunderstanding bring to him?" Yi Shaoqing was sunny and proud. Maybe he was a change. "Do you like playing this kind of game? Who knows what their brains are thinking?" Lin Zeyan was furious and did not answer. He knew that things weren't so simple. People like Chen Weiyan have a purpose in doing anything and will never take such a big risk for a single interest. He closed the file, leaned against the back of the chair, closed his eyes and began to comb the cables. The photo appears in the brain: the shadow of a woman, the abandoned factory, and the story of the midnight street corner. This city has a saying that at midnight, the shadow of some missing people will appear on a specific street corner, as if guiding the followers to the truth. He suddenly opened his eyes and looked at Yi Shaoqing. "Have you heard of the shadow file?" Yi Shaoqing was stunned for a moment and clicked. "I heard that there is a network in the underground market that specializes in collecting and trading case information that the police cannot solve." "Why did you suddenly ask this?" Lin Zeyan did not answer directly, but took out a single sign from the drawer and wrote several keywords: missed case, Chen Weiyan, industrial area, and shadow file. He pushed the pen in front of her. "I doubt that this case has something to do with the shadow file. Anonymous letters, copy of the file, and even the abnormal behavior of rats may be part of this network." Yi Shaoqing looked at it and her eyes lit up. "Are you saying that someone deliberately indexed the line here? Want to let us dig the truth? It may also be a trap," Lin Zeyan said in a low voice. "No one knows who the manipulator behind the shadow file is. After entering this website, you may even have your life." Yi Shaoqing smiled and patted his shoulder. "What are you afraid of? I'm here. Are we going to explain this to those girls? No matter whether he is a network or a trap, will we know it just once?" Lin Zeyan didn't say anything, just looked down at the map on the table. The red marks looked like scars from the city, reminding him of the price of this case. He knew that Yi Shaoqing said it easily, but the next thing they had to face was probably more than a few traces in a real estate developer. They had already stepped into a mist, and the road behind had been cut off long ago. The only thing they could do was to continue walking forward until they saw what was behind the mist. The sky outside the window turned white and the city was about to usher in a new day, but Lin Zeyan knew that for them, the real darkness had just begun. He stood up, picked up his coat, and prepared to face the next challenge. Lin Zeyan pushed open the squeaking old door of the office. The sky outside was already bright, and the fog of the coastal city was like a thin slat covering the streets, making everything blurry. He wrapped his coat, lit a smoke, took a deep breath, and then slowly spit it out, the smoke spreading in the cold air, like a thread that had not yet been cleared in his brain. Yi Shaoqing followed him, holding a copy of the file that had just been printed out in his hand, and was talking about what happened last night in his mouth. "The mouse guy was so panicked last night, he must have lost something deadly," she said, with a little excited voice. "Do you think he has anything to do with the shadow file? We have to talk to him again." Lin Zeyan glanced at her, but did not answer, but just quietly accelerated his pace. He knew in his heart that people like Rat who were scrambling in the underground market knew something, but this kind of person was very stubborn and could not be opened without any means. What's more, the atmosphere of the warehouse last night was too strange, and he told himself that the place could not be entered at will. They need more information to decide what to do next. The two came to a 24-hour small restaurant on the Old Town, ordered 2 bowls of hot beef noodles, sat down and ate in disgust. There are not many people in the restaurant, only a few workers who get up early and walk along the road, and a young man wearing a baseball cap playing with his mobile phone with his head low. Lin Zeyan put the file on the table and tapped Chen Weiyan's name with the tip of chopsticks, with a low voice. The first thing today is to find out Chen Weiyan's movements over the past few years, especially the relationship between his company and the industrial area. Yi Shaoqing took a bite of the noodles and ordered the head. I have a few people in the local circle, so I should be able to dig up something. However, people like Chen Weiyan have the surface information as clean as white paper, so we have to find some less official ways. Shadow file, Lin Zeyan suddenly said, looking at her coldly. Don't you know a few people who are hiding in the underground market? Ask what this network is, and who is playing behind the scenes. Yi Shaoqing was stunned for a moment, then grinned. Okay, you're finally willing to touch this thing. I'll contact you tonight, but I have to remind you first that the shadow file is very deep, and it's not that easy to come out after entering. Lin Zeyan didn't say anything, but just ate the noodles with his head down, and was flying in his brain. He has heard the name of shadow file many times over the years, but every time he just listens to it, no one can tell what it is. Some say it is a story trading platform, some say it is an underground organization, and there's even a rumor that the people behind this network can control the dark side of the entire city. He never believed these ghosts, but the line of this mist case pointed repeatedly at it, forcing him to see this existence correctly. After eating the noodles, the two people moved separately. Yi Shaoqing went to contact her lineman and dug up the information about Chen Weiyan and shadow files, while Lin Zeyan decided to go back to near the industrial area first to see if he could find more traces from the warehouse last night. He opened an old used car, passed through the morning rush hour that the city was experiencing, and finally arrived at the abandoned area at around 9 o'clock in the morning. The industrial area has long lost the prosperity of the past. It is full of lens-shaped iron racks and broken factories. There is a smell of iron in the air, making people feel whaled. He parked his car at the entrance of the alley and walked in on foot. The urgency of the last night came again. The alley was so quiet that there were only a few birds yelling and winds blowing through the broken windows. He walked to the old warehouse in his memory, and the iron door was still half closed, and it was pitch black and it was hard to see clearly. He didn't rush into it, but walked around the warehouse and carefully observed the surrounding environment. There are several abandoned containers next to the warehouse, and some broken glass bottles and old papers are scattered on the ground, nothing special. But just as he was about to leave, he suddenly stepped on something hard under his feet. He looked down and saw that it was a small metal card with a string of numbers and letters engraved on the surface, like some number. He lifted up, wiped off the dust on it, and confided that it might be an asset label for a company. He moved his heart, took out his phone and took a photo, and then stuffed the metal card into his pocket. Although this thing is inconspicuous, it may be possible to find out what is. Just as he was about to continue searching, a deep alley suddenly came from a deep corner, as if someone was moving heavy objects. He immediately squatted down, hid behind a broken container, and held his breath and observed. The movement is getting closer and closer, and with several low-sounding spells, it sounds like two people. He carefully poked his head out and saw clearly through the faint light. One was the mouse I saw last night, and the other was a tall man wearing black collars, wearing ink glasses on his face, unable to see his long appearance clearly. "Where's the thing? Didn't you say that you put it here?" The man with black smiled low, but his language was filled with fire. The mouse panicked and held his hands. "I really let it go. I checked it last night, why didn't I see it anymore? Someone must have taken it away." "Take it?" Mo Yan Man sneered, "Who else will come here except you? Mouse, you'd better not play with me, otherwise you know the consequences." The mouse was so scared that his legs were soft and said in a daze, I really didn't care about you. Or I'll look for it again, maybe I'll lose somewhere. Lin Zeyan felt tight in his heart and held the metal card in his pocket unconsciously. He felt that 80% of the thing mentioned by this person was related to missed cases, and it might even be the fatal thing that the rats slapped last night. He didn't dare to move, so he continued to hide until the two of them were quarreling and walked away. He slowly stood up, patted the ashes on his body, and left in the opposite direction. Back on the car, he sent Yi Shaoqing a message in the first time, briefly explained what happened just now, and attached a photo of the metal sign to let her find out what the number was. Yi Shaoqing replied quickly, I received it. I have made progress here, so I will go back to the office to have a detailed chat in the evening. At 8 o'clock in the evening, the two gathered again in the old office of Lin Zeyan. As soon as Yi Shaoqing entered the door, she threw a piece of print paper, and a smug smile on her face. Look at this one, Chen Weiyan's bottom, I've dug a lot. Lin Zeyan took a look at several pages, and his eyebrows became tighter and tighter. This data shows that Chen Weiyan's company has been purchasing land near the industrial area for the past few years, ostensibly to create new projects, but many of the lands were abandoned after buying them without any signs of labor. What is even more suspicious is that a subsidiary of his company is responsible for some special projects and the financial reports are full of loopholes, such as deliberately covering something. Also, Yi Shaoqing came over and pointed to one of the pages. This subsidiary had a practical base in the industrial area 10 years ago, saying it was to study new materials, but then it suddenly closed and all the data was destroyed. I asked a veteran to talk to him, and he said that at that time, there were often strange sounds in the base, and some people entered and exited in the middle of the night, which was particularly strange. Lin Zeyan said that the missing places mentioned in the file appear in his brain almost coincide with this area. He said in a low voice, the experiment base, the missed case, the two may have direct contact. Yi Shaoqing spotted a smoke, leaned against the sofa, and vomited a smoke circle. You think Chen Weiyan would do anything with those missed people? Although he heard that he was not familiar with him, what kind of trouble would a person have to do at this age? Lin Zeyan did not answer the conversation, but enlarged the photo of the metal card and pushed it in front of her. What have you found? Yi Shaoqing glanced at him and said, this number is an asset tag used by Chen Weiyan in his early years, and is specially used for experimental equipment. I guess the thing you picked may have leaked from that base. Lin Zeyan's heart sank, and the ropes in his brain began to slowly connect. Chen Weiyan, the experiment base, the missed case, and the shadow file, these seemingly unrelated things seemed to point to the same truth behind them. He suddenly remembered the shadow in the anonymous letter, and the midnight message circulating in the city, and an indescribable uneasiness surged in his heart. Is there any news on the shadow file? He asked. Yi Shao was slightly clear and his expression became serious. Yes, but I have to remind you that this is more irritating than we think. I contacted an old acquaintance who said that shadow file is not a single network of information. There is a core group behind it, which specializes in selecting some potential cases, and then deliberately releases a wire to attract people to investigate. But no one who found the last one can escape unscathed. Why? Lin Zeyan's voice was deep. Because these cases are not ordinary people, Yi Shaoqing said in a low voice. Even if you are of Chen Weiyan, you can crush you to death. Moreover, the controller of the shadow file seems to know every follower well, as if you have already set up a network and wait for you to jump in. Lin Zeyan was silent for a moment. His brain was flashed by the panic of the mouse last night, and the threat of the ink mirror man. He knew that what Yi Shaoqing said was probably true. They have been targeted, whether it is Chen Weiyan's men or the back of the shadow file. They have to be careful every step next. There's another thing. Yi Shaoqing hesitated for a moment and continued. My acquaintance mentioned that Shadow Files was trading a large piece of information recently, saying it was related to the missed case 10 years ago. No one knew the specific content, but the buyer paid a high price. He said that if we want to dig the truth, we can try to get into the transaction, but the risk is very high. Lin Zeyan was not in a hurry to express his feelings, but just looked down at the map on the table. The red markings looked like the cities fighting, jumping at the rhythm of some dangerousness. He knew that this trading might be a breakthrough, but it could be a trap. They are now like walking on a steel wire, and if they make a mistake, they will be crushed to pieces. Think about it again. He finally opened his mouth, his voice as cold as if he had no feelings. First, find someone reliable to help us figure it out. At the same time, I always think he is the key to all of this. The leaves are sunny and there is no more to say. She knew that although Lin Zeyan looked cold, she had already calculated every step in her brain. She got up to pack up and prepared to contact more people, while Lin Zeyan leaned on the back of the chair, closed his eyes, and repeatedly recalled the shadow in the photo. The night outside the window became increasingly heavy, and countless neon lights began to light up in the city, as if they were covering some ulterior secrets. Lin Zeyan knew that they were getting closer and closer to the truth, but at the same time, danger was approaching step by step. What they have to face next is probably not just Chinwayan, nor is it just a shadow file, but the darkness in the deepest part of the city. The next morning, Lin Zeyan received an anonymous text message, with a simple content: "Tonight at midnight, to see me at the corner of the East Street." He looked at the words on the screen, his heart was nervous, and he felt that this could not be separated from the midnight shadow. He did not tell Yi Shaoqing and decided to go and explore the way first. At 11:50 at night, he was wearing a black coat and standing on a remote corner of the street in the east. He was scary around him, and only the road lights emitted a faint light. He clicked a smoke, pretended to be careless and looked around, and his brain was tightened. Lin Zeyan's heart beat faster and he unconsciously pressed the knife in his pocket. He slowly approached, trying to see the other person's face clearly, but the moment he approached, the shadow suddenly turned around and disappeared deep in the alley. He chased after him for a few steps, but only heard a low smile, as if it was coming from the underground, making people creepy. He stood there, his brain formed a group. What exactly is this? Is it really the shadow of the misleading person, or is someone deliberately making a fool? No matter which possibility it was, he knew that the truth behind this case was far more complicated than he thought. He took out his cell phone and sent a message to Yi Shaoqing: "There is a new thread, and I'll meet you tomorrow for a detailed chat." The night wind blew over, bringing a biting chill. Lin Zeyan wrapped his coat tightly and walked out of the alley. His back was pulled long under the lights, like another shadow, silently following him. When Lin Zeyan returned to the old office, it was already dawn. The fog in coastal cities is more dense than last night, as if it can penetrate into the bones, making people feel uncomfortable. He pushed the door open, and the smell of the smoke from last night was still there. The files on the table were scattered, and the red marks on the map looked particularly dazzling under the dim light. He sat directly on the chair without opening the light, and repeatedly replayed the scene from the corner of the street last night, the vague shadow, and the low smile, like a thorn, which made him panic. He took out his cell phone, turned to the news that he sent to Yi Shaoqing last night, confirmed that she saw it, and then threw the cell phone on the table, leaned on the back of the chair and closed his eyes. But my brain couldn't stop at all, including missing cases, Chinwayan, shadow file, and that shadow. These things were like a group of terrible things, and they couldn't even sort them out. He knew that this case was not simply an explanation to the missing girls, but turned into a game with the dark side of the city. The door was suddenly pushed open, and Yi Shaoqing came in with a bag of breakfast in his hand and an unlit smoke in his mouth. She was wearing a black robe and her hair was tied casually. She looked like she hadn't had a good sleep, and she was a little blue and black now. She threw breakfast on the table and glanced at Lin Zeyan. "Yeah, my face is so bad. Did you go last night?" "I said there is a new line. What exactly is it?" Lin Zeyan didn't rush to answer, so he got up and took a bottle of mineral water from the refrigerator, took a sip, and then said in a low voice, "I went to the corner of the East District last night and saw something, not very good for nothing." Yi Shaoqing raised her eyebrows, sat on the sand, and tore a packet of bean straws. "Don't sell the squid, tell me clearly. What does it mean to be not very good?" He hesitated for a moment, and finally told the story of last night, including the anonymous text message, and the shadows appearing on the street corner at midnight. After saying that, he looked at Yi Shaoqing and waited for her reaction. After Yi Shaoqing finished listening, the expression on her face changed from curiosity to an indescribable solemnity. She bit the straw, was silent for a few seconds before she opened her mouth. The shadow you said is exactly the same as the one in the city. It appears at midnight to guide the follower, but is this too evil, right? Is this really such a thing? Lin Zeyan sneered and snatched his head. I don't believe in ghosts and gods, but that thing last night was not like humans. Maybe someone deliberately made a fool of himself and wanted to lead us on the hook. No matter what it is, this street corner cannot get rid of the misunderstanding case. Yi Xiao was slightly clear and his fingers knocked on the table. Then what are you going to do? Go again? Or should we dig through Chen Weiyan's line first? 2 heads in, Lin Zeyan said in a low voice. Chen Weiyan is the key, but the shadows on the corner of the street cannot be let go. I feel that there is a connection between these two. Today you continue to stare at Chen Weiyan's movement, especially the old file of his company's experiment base, and dig as much as you can. I will go to the corner to check out the equipment and take pictures of things back. Yi Xiaoqing sang aloud, but he didn't object, but just reminded him, be careful, don't really hit something uncensored. Also, I have contacted people with the transactions on the shadow file. The next night, we can get in at an underground bar in the old town. We can get in, but we have to prepare mentally. That place is not a good place. Lin Zeyan said a little, but he didn't say much. He knew that in the next few days, they would have to be careful every step they took. Chen Weiyan, shadow file, and the shadows on the street corners, these 3 lines are like a network, the tighter they become. If you are not careful, you may ruin them to pieces. That night, Lin Zeyan came to the corner of the East District again, and the time was still 10 minutes before midnight. He was wearing a black jacket, carrying a small bag, and was equipped with a small camera and a self-defense folding knife. The street corners were still as quiet as it was, and the light of the road lights illuminated a small area, and the alleys around it were as dark as if they could swallow people. He found an inconspicuous corner and stood there, clicked a smoke, pretending to be careless and stared at the place where the shadow appeared last night. The sound of midnight clock hit, and suddenly there was an indescribable sense of pressure in the air. Lin Zeyan's heart beat faster and he unconsciously pressed the camera in his bag. At this moment, the blurry human-shaped will appeared in the shadows on the corner of the street again, still standing quietly, as if waiting for something. He didn't rush to move, but slowly took out the camera, pressed the recorder against the shadow. But at the moment the lens was in focus, the shadow suddenly turned around, as if he had noticed his existence. Lin Zeyan felt nervous and saw a white face through the lens, his eyes as empty as 2 black holes, staring at him straight. He subconsciously took a step back, and the camera in his hand almost fell to the ground. The shadow didn't move, just looked at him quietly, then raised his hand slowly, as if pointing to the depths of the alley. Lin Zeyan's voice buzzed in his brain, forcing himself to calm down. He knew that no matter whether it was a human or a ghost, it would not appear without reason. He gritted his teeth, turned off the camera, and walked slowly towards the direction the shadow pointed. The shadow didn't keep up, but stood quietly, until he walked into the alley and disappeared into the darkness. The depth of the alley is an old brick wall, with some garbage and abandoned wooden boards piled up in the corners of the wall, nothing special. But Lin Zeyan noticed that there was a brick on the wall with different colors, as if it was repaired later. He squatted down and knocked it lightly with the tip of the knife, and found that the back of the brick was empty. He moved his heart and carefully pried open the tiles, and there was a small iron box hidden inside. He took out the iron box and looked at it with the light of his mobile phone. There was a series of familiar numbers engraved on the surface of the box, exactly like the metal cards he had picked up in the warehouse before. He opened the box and there was a folded paper with a few words on it. The truth is in the factory. Don't do it alone at midnight. The words were crooked, as if they were written under extreme fear. Lin Zeyan looked at the paper and felt a chill that could not be said in his heart. The factory is 80% the scrap factory that was cut off from the missing case, and the early experiment base of Chen Weiyan Company. He knew that this paper might be a breakthrough, but it could be a trap. He packed the iron box and paper and quickly left the alley, and his brain had already started to calculate the next plan. When he returned to the office, Yi Xiaoqing was already waiting for him, holding a piece of newly printed data in his hand, and his face was not very good-looking. She saw Lin Zeyan coming in and asked, "What happened? Have you seen that thing again?" Lin Zeyan pointed his head, through the iron box and paper on the table, and briefly talked about what happened tonight. After Yi Shaoqing finished listening, her eyebrows were so angry that she could get rid of her hair. Is this too strange? Who would hide this thing in the wall? And this paper felt like a warning or an inspiration. No matter what it is, the wasteland line must be checked, Lin Zeyan said in a low voice. If this place cannot be separated from Qinhuayan, it may also be the key to the missed case. What progress has you made here? Yi Shaoqing pushed the data to him. I dug up Qinhuayan's old account. 10 years ago, his company did have a practical experiment base on the side of the factory. On the surface, it was researching new materials, but internal employees were circulating, and some illegal human experiments were being done. Later, due to an accident, the base was closed and all the data was destroyed, but a veteran said that several young girls were taken in that year, and they never came out again. Lin Zeyan heard it, his fingers clenched unconsciously. The missed case files in his brain, the photos of those girls, and the empty eyes of that shadow. He said in a low voice, if this is true, then Qinhuayan is not just a suspect, he may be the mastermind behind all this. Yi Shaoqing clicked a smoke and vomited a smoke circle. Then we have to speed up. The day after tomorrow is the shadow file transaction, and I may get more certificates there. I have arranged a fake identity, so we can mix in and listen to the voice. Lin Zeyan said something, and he didn't say anything more. He knew that the next 2 days were the key. They must get enough evidence before Qinhuayan responds and exposes the case. The next night, the two came to an inconspicuous underground bar in the old town. From the outside, this place looks like a small shop, but there is no sky when you go in. The lights are dim and the air is filled with the smell of smoke and alcohol. Several dozen people gathered together in 3 or 3, chatting in a low voice, and the atmosphere is so strange that it makes people's skin numb. Lin Zeyan and Yi Shaoqing were wearing low-key and baseball caps, pretending to be for the transaction information, and mixing in the crowd didn't attract any attention. The deal begins soon. A man wearing a mask walks onto the stage and introduces tonight's merchandise, several unsolved traces of cases, including the circumstance of a 10-year-old. Lin Zeyan heard it and felt nervous. He noticed that there were several people in the audience who expressed great interest in this thread, and some even offered directly, with the numbers exceedingly high. Yi Shaoqing hurried to his ears and said in a low voice, "These people may have Qinhuayan's legs. We have to be careful not to expose them." Lin Zeyan said a little, staring at the masked man on the stage. He thought this guy was not simple and might be one of the core members of the shadow file. After the transaction ended, he and Yi Shaoqing did not rush to leave, but followed a few bidders to try to touch their bottom. But just as they were about to leave, the back door of the bar was suddenly knocked open, and several men in black rushed in and started smashing the field without saying a word. The scene suddenly became a group, with some screaming and some running away. Lin Zeyan reacted very quickly and grabbed Yi Shaoqing and hid behind the bar. He looked out and found that the men in black were not trying to get rid of things, but were looking for a few people who had just bought the price. His heart sank and said to Yi Shaoqing in a low voice, "This is Qinhuayan's people, and they are probably here to slap. We have to take advantage of the situation." Yi Shao was slightly clear, and the two of them took advantage of the chaos to slip out from the side, but when they reached the entrance of the alley, they heard a low sneer from the head, "Run quite fast, Detective Lin." Lin Zeyan turned around suddenly and found a man wearing a black glass standing far away, holding a gun in his hand, smiling coldly. He realized that this guy was the man in the Imperial sneak who had met in the warehouse before, and was probably Qinhuayan's subordinate. Without saying a word, he pushed Yi Shaoqing directly and said in a low voice, "Run, don't turn around." Yi Shaoqing wanted to say something, but looking at Lin Zeyan's eyes, she could only grit her teeth and turn around. Lin Zeyan stood there, staring at Mon Man with his eyes tightly on the man, and his brain was flying quickly and swaying. The man with a cold smile was not in a hurry to move, but just sneered. "Mr. Chen said, it would be a nuisance to keep someone like you. But he was also very curious about how much you can find." Lin Zeyan didn't answer, and slowly reached into his pocket and held the folding knife tightly. He knew that this confrontation would not have a good result, but he had no intention of just accepting it. Just as Moen Man was about to pull the puller, a rapid sound of footsteps suddenly came from deep in the alley. Several black shadows rushed out and directly slapped at Moen Man and pressed him to the ground. Lin Zeyan was stunned for a moment and immediately recognized one of them, the mouse. The guy was covered in sweat and gasping for a long time and shouted to him, "Are you still fucking me in a daze? Run! This place is about to explode soon." Without much questioning, he turned around and ran away, and his brain became a group. Why would the mouse help him? Who are those dark shadows? But now is not the time to think about these things. He has to ensure that he and Yi Shaoqing are safe first. After running out of several streets, he finally found Yi Shaoqing at a remote intersection. Both of them looked at each other and saw the happiness after the disaster. "What happened just now?" Yi Shaoqing asked, panting. "I don't know," Lin Zeyan said with a low voice, "but I guess the mouse may also have something to do with the shadow file. There are 80% disagreements within them, and some people don't want Chen Weian to make things worse. The leaves are sunny and there is no more to say." The two knew that although they had not received any real record in the transaction, Chen Weian had already set his sights on them. Next, they only have one choice: to directly snatch the factory and find the truth about the missed case. Otherwise, if Chen Weian counterattacks, they will not be able to save their lives. Late the next night, the two people came to the scrap factory around the city. It was as dark as ink, the factory was broken and it seemed to collapse at any time, and the surroundings were quiet and there was only the sound. Lin Zeyan was holding a flashlight, Yi Shaoqing was carrying a small bag, with a camera and some self-defense tools on her head. The two of them walked around the factory for a while and finally found a half-covered iron door, which was pitch black and there was a smell of rotten smell in the air. "This place can really scare people to death," Yi Shaoqing muttered in a small voice, but still followed Lin Zeyan. "The factory is filled with raw lens machines and scattered iron sheets. When the flashlight is swept, you can occasionally see the blood left on the wall, which makes people's skin numb." They walked into the corridor and finally stopped at a basement entrance. The door in the basement was locked, but the lock had a lens, so it opened with a force pry. After going down, the two discovered a huge experiment room full of old equipment and glass jars. There were some things that could not be seen clearly in the jar, such as some kind of biological code. Lin Zeyan's heart sank, and his brain flashed through the information that Yi Shaoqing dug out: human experience. Just as he was about to take a photo, a deep basement suddenly felt a low moan, as if something was still alive. Yi Shaoqing almost screamed, and Lin Zeyan Lima covered her mouth and signaled her not to make a sound. The two walked carefully in the direction of the sound, and finally stopped in front of an iron can. There was a woman in the candle, with her garments and white face as white as paper. She looked at them with a hollow look, and her mouth kept saying, save me, they are still there." Lin Zeyan's heartbeat accelerated and realized that this woman was a victim in the missed case file. Just as he was about to open the lock, a sneer suddenly came from behind him. "Detective Lin, it's you." He turned around suddenly and found that Chen Weian was standing far away, following several men in black, holding guns in his hands, smiling as cold as a poisonous snake. Lin Zeyan knew that he really couldn't escape this time, but he had no intention of just admitting it. He said to Yi Shaoqing in a low voice, "Cut it down and spread the truth no matter what." Yi Shao was slightly clear, and his hand had quietly pressed the switch of the camera. Chen Weian didn't notice this little action, but just approached slowly, and his language was full of ridicule. "Do you really think you can move me? Over the years, many people have wanted to check me, and in the end they have become the standard in this factory. You are no exception." Lin Zeyan looked at him coldly, and his brain flew quickly and turned to his body. He knew that fighting hard was impossible, and the only hope was to delay time and let Yi Shaoqing send the certificate out. He deliberately angered Chen Weian and said, "The things you did will be exposed long ago. Those girls, and everything in the factory, will always be explained to them." Chen Weian smiled, smiling particularly. "Exposed? Who would believe it? This city has been bought by me for a long time. You are just two clowns who can't even save your life. Do you want to make a big fuss? At this moment, a sudden burst of footsteps came from the entrance of the basement, and several black shadows rushed in, holding weapons in their hands and directly blazed at Chen Wei's people. Lin Zeyan was stunned for a moment and immediately recognized the person who was leading the way, the mouse. His face was covered in blood, and he gasped and shouted, "Detective Lin, go quickly. The people in the shadow file will not let him come." The scene suddenly became a group of people. Lin Zeyan took the trouble and pulled Yi Shaoqing toward the exit, leaving only a thought in his brain: go out alive and take the truth out. They stumbled out of the factory, and the sound of guns and shouts behind them gradually disappeared, but the pressure finally stopped. A squid pail appeared in the sky, and the two finally stopped walking and leaned against a broken wall and gasped. Yi Shaoqing was still holding the camera tightly in her hand, and her face was full of happiness after the disaster. She said in a low voice, "Did we really dig out the truth?" Lin Zeyan didn't answer, but just looked at the city far away, his eyes as cold as ice. He knew that the battle was not over yet. Although Chen Wei was recreated, this kind of person would not fall easily. And the true face of the shadow file has never been revealed. They just want a small step, and there is a longer way to go next. The morning fog scattered and the city began to roar, as if nothing had happened. But Lin Zeyan knew that the shadows of those missing were still wandering on a certain street corner, waiting for the final answer. And he will continue to chase after it until the darkness of this city is torn open.